There was a scene a couple of years ago from the Las Vegas Raiders, still hard to get used to saying that, the Las Vegas Raiders NFL football team. So there was a man who had been a lifelong Patriots fan. He happened to be in Las Vegas when the New England Patriots came to town to play the Las Vegas Raiders. And he was so excited. He's like, I finally get to see my home team. And so he went wearing his Patriots jersey. Unfortunately, there was a couple in the row that he was sitting in who were offended that he would be wearing Patriots jersey at the Raiders stadium. I wish I could tell you this kind of stuff doesn't happen. It happens all the time. Constantly. So the video, because people were sitting behind watching this, they were recording it, and they thought these people were ridiculous. His husband and wife, you can see her going, see, here's his Patriots jersey, and so he's in Raiderland, and she went after him the entire game. Getting in his grill, at one point, she takes her coat and flaps it in front of him. You can see she's standing in front of him. She gets in his face, pointing, screaming throughout the game. And the amazing thing about it is, look at his body language. He never responds. He became like a viral hero because this went viral. Matter of fact, the New England Patriots owner, a guy named Robert Kraft, saw the video, invited and flew him out to Patriot Stadium and put him in his luxury box because he was so amazed that this guy didn't, and we're all amazed, right? If you saw go online, look the video up, it's incredible. Because I'm not sure I would have had the self-control in that moment to do what this guy did. And it's so countercultural, right? That's not what our society expects. That's why the video is so incredible, because what we expect is he gets offended at her treatment and goes at her in some way, right? That's what we expect. We expect offense. Getting offended yields escalation. She was offended and escalated, but he doesn't. This is the culture that we live in. I mean, people get offended about everything, right? Isn't it true? I mean, just forget to give somebody their order of fries in a McDonald's drive-thru and they will be offended and blow up, right? And crawl through the window and try and kill you because you didn't give them their fries. Fries. One of those days, all right. This is a society that we live in. Everybody's offended about everything all the time. And unfortunately, here's what I've observed. Tell me if this isn't true for you too, that same attitude is seeped into the church. And so Christians, just like the rest of the world, are easily offended, constantly offended, and they fight all the time. Just like what we see in the culture, unfortunately, we see in the world. And Christians are offended all the time. And they make quite a lot of headlines about their anger when they're offended. Matter of fact, I'm going to start with something that may be a little controversial for you. Okay, so I want you to just withhold your judgment. Okay, I want to push you a little bit on this today. Did you see the Olympics? Did you watch the opening ceremonies? So some of you know that during the opening ceremonies, there was a place where there was this depiction of what was thought to be and debated about whether or not it was the Lord's Supper being kind of made fun of. Did any of you hear this? Okay, some of you heard of it, some of you didn't. Okay. So I'm going to show you the picture, and I'm going to show you why Christians thought that they were making fun of the Lord's Supper. So you can see why Christians thought that the group on top, which was the actual scene during the Olympic opening ceremonies, why they thought, oh my goodness, they're making fun of Da Vinci's representation of the Lord's Supper. And Christians were offended. They were so angry, they took to social media, they took to the news, they boycotted. I had Christian friends who wouldn't watch a single moment of the Olympics, and I said, why? What did the athletes do? It's like, I'm offended, I'm just not watching it. It's like, okay, but you know, some of those athletes are Christians trying to use this as a platform to talk about their faith. Doesn't matter, they're offended. Christians were so offended, they demanded an apology, and even after, initially, there was some report like they were trying to deny it, then they were like, no, it was. And then they apologized, and they were like, we view their apology as insincere. Christians One Christian, right after that happened, Christians began to send threats and abusive language to those participants in that scene. It was in Christian love. Right, it was threats in Christian love and abusive language in Christian love. I mean, right? Of course. Right after that, if you remember, like within 24 hours, there was like a little part of Paris that lost electricity. One pastor went on and said, that's God's judgment. He flicked the lights off. Is that what he did? So he was judging them and wanted them to know how angry. Literally, I track on a website with church leaders, and there was an article about, yep, it was offensive, and you should be offended. And I thought, should I? Okay, now, that's the controversial part I want you to put a pin in. Because plenty of Christians are offended to this day, and they are still offended. So should we or should we not? Regardless of what, and I want to really push you to think about that. But regardless of what you think about that specific incident, nobody denies that Christians are easily offended and that Christians get angry a lot. But here's what I do know, and all of you know this too. If we could just kind of tamp that down a little bit so that we're not so easily offended, there would be a lot of positive consequences. First off, we'd have a lot less stress in our lives if we weren't getting offended so easily. Our relationships would get better because have you ever had a relationship fall apart because they were offended at you? Happens all the time. And not only that, there's this whole characteristic of something that we don't talk about enough as a church. And that's this quality called joy. Joy. It's supposed to be this indescribable, beautiful, visible trait of God inside of people who say they follow Jesus. And when we're getting offended, nobody says, oh, look at those joyful Christians. Because we're not associating anger and outrage with joy. So where's the line? Because some of you are like, well, yeah, but Brian, are you kidding me? You want me to be less offended in a world like this? Didn't you see what they posted on Twitter last night? Didn't you hear what that other political person that I'm not voting for said? And I'm trying to talk to you about being less offended during a political cycle with an election coming up? Are you kidding me? Some of you are so offended that anyone would vote for the other side. It's like, okay. Doesn't seem very possible. So that's what we're going to explore today. We're starting a little series I'm calling the Refinery Sessions, and I'll tell you that you know what a refinery is, right? It's taking something that's less pure and making it purer. It's about making it better. I feel like God has been refining me lately on some key things. So this is primarily a series for me, and you all get to participate, because this is what God has been refining in me. So welcome. We're going to start by talking about what do you do when you feel offended. So this is the big one we're going to start with. So I want to ask you to open your program, grab your notes. Welcome to those of you who are joining us online. Again, if you go to our website at pennychurchlife.com, you can grab your notes, grab a pen. There's some really important things I want you to think about today. So the first point, by the way, I am skipping no points today. Some of you are like, it's a 4-point, that never happens. Yes, I know. But I'm only going to skim through point 1. I am going to give it to you. So I want you to learn to think differently about this topic of being offended. The culture says it's fine. The culture does it all the time. What if we're not supposed to be like the culture? What if we're not supposed to be like the culture? And why would I say that? And I'd planned to say a lot more about this, but I really want you to know at least the 3 things that I was going to say. The first thing that happens whenever I get offended at another person is that love is damaged. Guaranteed. If I get offended at you, you get offended at me, then love is interrupted. Maybe that's a better word. Love is interrupted. And again, you don't have to take my word for it. There's a chapter of the Bible called 1 Corinthians 13 that's called the love chapter of the Bible. It literally describes what love is like, what it does, and what it doesn't do. And so if you see any of these things that love shouldn't be doing, you know it's not love. Love, it says in 1 Corinthians 13:5, is not easily angered, and it keeps no record of wrongs. Do easily offended people keep record of wrongs? Here's a tougher question. Do you keep record of wrongs? Are there people who've wronged you and you are still angry about it today? Love would never do that. And love is not easily angered. Unfortunately, being offended is about being angry. If you offend me, I'm angry. And that's not loving. The expectation is that you will see more and more love inside of me. So love is always interrupted. It's always interrupted. A second thing that being offended does is it creates divisions. It always divides people, families, friendships, churches. You get offended, and all of a sudden, the relationship disintegrates. And the book of Proverbs, this book of wisdom, this great book of wisdom, describes why. Look at this verse. I love this. An offended friend is harder to win back than a fortified city. So again, we don't have fortified cities today, so we don't know what this means. But it was like in those days, if you wanted to conquer a city, let's say that you owned the city, you were driven out, and you wanted to go reconquer it, but the city had big walls or fortifications. You didn't have tanks, you didn't have bombs. The only way to do that was to charge. Boy, that's really hard to do because they're up on a wall shooting arrows down at you, throwing spears at you. It's really hard to retake a fortified city. And he's saying that's what it's like when you get offended. You become fortified against the person who offends you. And you often see it in the way that they even, body language, right? It's like, you said that to me? So I'm looking down my nose at you. My arms are protective between you and me, and I'm offended. And it says, listen, winning back a friendship when you've offended the other person, if you're easily offended, it's really hard to do. Because they're going to build walls. They're not going to let you back in. But then the other thing that's really, really always been amazing to me is how Christians justify all the bad behavior that goes on once I'm offended with another Christian. Especially what I've seen. I've been in this role for 35 years. You know how many times I've watched Christians get offended at something someone else does in the church or something I do happens, and all of a sudden, gossip, slander, cruel words, insults, all these beautiful characteristics that Jesus says that we're supposed to be known for, right? It's like none of these are on the list. These are anti-love. And yet Christians feel justified because they've been offended. None of this is how we're supposed to live. So I'm going to show you two verses here that really struck me and how this series came to be. This first one, I've been reading slowly through the book of Colossians in my own day each morning. And I read this one. But now you must all rid yourselves of all such things as these. And look at the very first word, the only word I put down. He said, the very first thing I want you to rid yourself of is anger. In other words, there is an expectation in Christianity that if my faith is really growing, I'm becoming a less angry person. So only you can evaluate yourself on this. Well, actually, that's not true. People around you can evaluate you too. Are you becoming less angry? Or is your anger growing? He says, listen, this is what I want for you if you follow Jesus, is that your anger gets less and less and less. Well, you can't be getting offended all the time and live out the truth of that verse. All right, so much more to say about it. That's all I wanted for time's sake. I wanted to just have you think differently. Being offended is very costly. So I want you to instead, second, remember that offended is always a choice. Being offended is a choice. I choose every time whether I'm going to be offended or not. And that doesn't sound like it's been our experience as human beings, but it's true. I'll show you. Sometimes, there have been plenty of times when I probably should have been offended and I didn't, and sometimes it was by choice. Sometimes it was just because I'm a little bit naive. So my wife is just going to, she's never heard the story. She's just going to absolutely go, that's Brian. So I was a freshman in high school. As a freshman, I was the smallest boy in the entire freshman class. So that makes you the bully, or the target of every bully, right? And the bully, yeah, makes you the target of every bully. So one day I was in science class, and I was in the front row, thankfully, and a few rows back was this kid named Ron, one of the big bullies in the school. And the teacher got called to the office, and they didn't send a replacement in, so we were sitting there alone, and so what happens? Ron starts picking on me. He's in the back. He's like, hey, Brian. He starts insulting me and calling me names. And one of the names he calls me is redneck. Now, I'm 13, 14 at the time. I've never heard the phrase, and I'm very literal. Yeah. So I'm like, redneck? My neck isn't red. I have no idea what this even means. But you know about Ron? He's got bright red hair, big red freckles. He's red all the time. So he's insulting me and calling me red. I finally turn around and say, I'm not the redneck. You're the one with the redneck. And the place loses it. The whole class bursts out laughing at him. Ron turns beet red. I mean, proves my point. His neck is completely red. Everyone's laughing. He's so angry he can't even talk. And I turned back around. I'm like, I don't know what that meant. That's classic me. Yep. So I wasn't offended because I didn't even know what he was saying. But what I've learned since then is offended is always my choice. Always my choice. I choose if I'm going to be offended by what you say or do, or I choose not to. Now, some of you are like, that just doesn't seem like our current reality. Why would you say that? Well, it's because I read what happened in Jesus' life. So let me show you this. In first century Israel was divided. Did you know that? So when Jesus was here on earth, you had the northern part up here called Galilee, and the southern part down here called Judea. And you can see Jerusalem, that's a really important city, right? And up here is Nazareth and Canaan. So Jesus did a lot of ministry in both of these places, but in the middle was Samaria. Now, the Samaritans were sort of Jewish. They had some Jewish practices, but they had changed a lot of things. So the true Jews in the north and the south, they hated the Samaritans. So if you read the New Testament now and read about Samaritans, that's why Jesus used them as examples, because the Jews hated them, because they had changed the religious faith. And the Samaritans in return hated the Jews. So matter of fact, godly Jews from the south or north wouldn't even go through this area. They'd cross the Jordan River, walk down over here, and come back in down here, because they didn't even want to be around them. Now that's a big deal, right? You add distance to your walk. Because you weren't taking a bus or a car. That's how much they hated him. But now, if you know anything about Jesus, he just marched right through here, right? Right up through there. He didn't care. He was like, yep, they're important to me. And so one time, Jesus is traveling from the north to the south. He's going down to Jerusalem. There's going to be a celebration. And so he's traveling down there, and he stops in a Samaritan village. And in those days, the hospitality laws were really, really strict. It was socially expected that if you needed my help, a meal or a place to stay or hospitality, that I was to offer that to you, because what options did people have? So it was really embedded in their culture that you would demonstrate hospitality when people needed it. So Jesus and his disciples come to the Samaritan village, and when they go into the village to see what's available to them, look what happens. The people of the village did not welcome Jesus because he was on his way to Jerusalem. There's that bias. It's like, you're going there, you are not welcome. And to us, this doesn't sound like a big deal, right? But 2,000 years ago, what options did they have? Go to McDonald's? A Best Western? I mean, this is a big deal, and it is a social insult to turn someone away when they needed hospitality. It's so insulting that two of Jesus' disciples, James and John, respond this way. When James and John saw this, they said to Jesus, "Lord, should we call down fire from heaven to burn them up?" That's how big a deal this is, right? We don't understand this because our culture isn't like this, but 2,000 years ago, this was a huge insult to Jesus. And they are so offended that they say to Jesus, "Jesus, just say the word and we will fricassee them. They will burn. They will burn." In Christian love. We will fry them, right? And they thought that this was such a great idea. By the way, their nicknames are James and John, the sons of thunder. They wanted to bring the lightning here. They were so angry that this person had dared to offend Jesus, or this town had dared to offend Jesus. Now, how does Jesus respond? Well, this is really important, okay? And this is why I wanted you to think about that parade story at the beginning. How did Jesus respond when people treated him offensively? Jesus turned, and who did he rebuke? His own disciples. You know what this rebuke is, right? It's like, how dare you? How dare you say that about human beings? Don't you ever say anything like that again. That has nothing to do with love. And he rebukes his disciples, and he says, let's just go on. Was Jesus offended when people treated him offensively? You got two responses to offensive behavior in this very story. The first one, the response of his disciples, angry, get even, how dare you treat our Jesus this way, you're going to fry. Right? And then you got the Jesus response, which is, be quiet, move on. Which do you think Jesus was saying when the people put that parade out there? Do you think Jesus was in heaven getting hurt, his feelings hurt, and he was just like, oh my goodness, this hurt me so bad. I'm just so mad about this. I'm going to turn their lights off. All right, do you think that's what he did? Or do you think he was sitting there going, Christians, followers, come on, be quiet, move on. Be quiet and move on. You just don't need to be angry about this. Now some of you are like, oh, it just doesn't seem to fit my understanding of this. Okay. Look at what he says. Oh, how do you do this? Let's go to how do you do it first. Tell the right story. You got to tell the right story in order to be able to do this. If you're going to be less offended in a world that has so many things to be offended about, right? Couldn't you spend the rest of your life being offended as a follower of Jesus? Oh my goodness. Every single second of every single day, somebody is saying or doing something offensive. You can make yourself completely miserable if you want to. Why would you do that? It's not what Jesus said. Be quiet and move on. So tell the right story. This is the way to do it. And I tell you this, you're always telling stories, always. And here's how your stories happen. There's an action, something takes place, like the disciples, the Samaritans saying, nope, you're not welcome here. Then there's a belief that gets formed in your mind. The belief is instant. Your brain instantly tells stories. And then there's an emotional consequence. So let me show you how this happened as I was prepping this message. I read this story of this woman. I don't know what it's like anymore with Valentine's Day, but when I was a kid, Valentine's Day was a cool holiday in elementary school. I have no idea what it's like anymore, probably not like this. But in public school, when I was in elementary school, when Valentine's Day came around, you would bring in a shoe box with a hole cut in the top. Anyone else do this? I mean, this was how, okay, all right, good. This was so fun. And you brought cards for all of your classmates, and many times they bring cookies and candy and the little hearts that had messages, and you always hoped that the cute girl gave you the heart that said, I love you, or something like that, rather than you're neat. So it's like, all right. So, and then you'd hand out the cards, and then you'd get your cards, and you go home and you read what they all said. It was so exciting and fun. Well, this one woman, decades later in life, way after elementary school, she was reflecting on a Valentine's Day when she was in elementary school, and she was mad. And she said this, one Valentine's Day in elementary school, I only got a handful of cards. That's sad, right? Only got a handful of cards. And she said, there was this boy named Joey who had been teasing me for weeks. And I felt as if he had turned my whole class against me. Now that, by the way, is a fundamental misunderstanding of why elementary school boys tease girls, right? Right, exactly. Some of you know. Why do little boys tease little girls? Because they like them. So she totally understood it, but misunderstood, but she was angry. Decades later, she said, I felt alone, hurt, and eventually offended about the way I was treated. So again, here's where all of emotions come from. Something happens. Not many Valentine's Day cards in her box. Belief. Joy was telling everyone not to give me any cards. He did this. That's the story she told, right? There's got to be an explanation why I didn't get any, so she tells a story. Now, by the way, how likely is that story to be true? I mean, pretty much not happen. Didn't happen. How many of you actually think that little boy ran around and said, don't bring her any cards? I mean, it's 0.001% likely that it happened. It didn't happen. That's not why it happened. But she believed it, and we believe our beliefs all the time. We believe these stories that we tell ourselves, and an emotional consequence, in her words, decades later, angry, hurt, lonely, and offended. That's where all your emotions come from. They always come from the stories that you tell about what happens to you. They don't come from what happens to you. They come from the stories that you tell about what happens to you. And what we forget all the time is that there are more letters in the alphabet than just A, B, and C. There are D and E. You can dispute the negative thought in your mind and exchange it for something positive. So let me tell you this summer why I wasn't offended when that parade happened in the Olympics. I was reading all this, seeing the Christian reaction. I wasn't offended. Because here were the thoughts in my mind. I wrote them down. I thought, you know what? These people who've done this, it just reveals that they don't know who Jesus is. And they don't know him personally. Because if they just understood a little bit about how deeply Jesus loves them as they are, Not with a Christian love in America, which is change, come, become like us, then I'll love you. But with unconditional love that says, I love you just as you are. You come to me, and I will change you in whatever way I want. And I thought, if only they knew how much this Jesus that they had just done this about, if only they knew how much he loved them, it would stun them and change their lives. So that's what I was thinking. That's why I wasn't offended. That's why my response was just to pray. It's like, that's what I would want. Again, let's go to Proverbs. Look at this verse. A person's wisdom yields patience. What does it say? It's to one's glory to, what should we do with offenses? Overlook an offense. Overlook an offense. We don't have to call everything out. We don't have to get offended all the time. And we don't have to get angry all the time. Wisdom should result in us being less offended. If we're getting angrier, then we are literally missing that opening verse about rid yourselves of all such things as these, which is anger. Now, if you get offended and you want to handle it the Jesus way, not the disciples' way, then you got to go to one last step. So some of you think all of this is hard. I'm sorry, we're not into the hard part yet. The real hard part about what to do when you get offended, besides realizing it's your choice, realizing that you can choose something different and tell a better story about that person, the real hard part is this. Now, what Jesus wants us to do is to forgive them and show kindness to them. It's one thing just not to be offended, and that's good, but it's not where Jesus wants us to stay. What he really wants us to do is go to the next step, which is we forgive and we show kindness. So let me show you, as I said, this series came out of my reading in the book of Colossians as I was just reading super slow through this book. And I read this verse. I read that other one about get rid of anger, and then I read this verse. Look at this. Make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Look at that phrase. Forgive anyone who offends you. Does it say forgive some of the people who offend you? No, that's not what he says, is it? God wants us to get to the point where our hearts are so open that we're able to forgive anyone who offends us. Do you? Are you at that point in your spiritual journey where you can forgive anyone who offends you? Are you at that point? I mean, it's a pretty powerful verse, isn't it? And notice what he roots it in. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. The reason why I forgive anyone who offends me is because Jesus Christ is my leader. He's my shepherd. I'm the sheep. I follow him. And if you want to see the amazing example of Jesus doing this, you look at what happened on the cross. Jesus hangs dying on the cross, and some of you have read the words of Jesus as he hung there dying on the cross. As he hangs dying on the cross, which I can't imagine a more offensive thing than to be falsely accused, betrayed by a friend, nailed to a cross to die as an innocent man. That's pretty offensive to me. If you did that to me, I don't know what I'd be saying from that place, but I sure probably wouldn't have been saying what Jesus said. And Jesus, as he's hanging there in this offensive situation, says to them, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. By the way, look at the story he's telling about the people who did this awful thing. They don't know what they're doing. It's the same story we could tell about those people in Paris. They just don't know what they're doing. Let's be like Jesus. Let's be like Jesus. Father, forgive them. They don't even know what they're doing. That is an amazing demonstration of not just forgiveness, but kindness. And if we would understand just how powerful this is, you want me to tell you, Christians in America, in my opinion, have it all wrong about why Christianity is suffering and struggling and dying in America. We think it's because we don't have the Ten Commandments posted, and we think it's because they're not praying in school, and we think it's not because of these elements. Oh, no. I do not agree with that. I think it's because they want nothing to do with Jesus because they look at us. And they say, that is so offensive to me, I want nothing to do with you, Jesus. And the reality is, they don't even know him. Because to many of them, we're the only Jesus they're ever going to see. But when they see Jesus, it absolutely transforms relationships. You want to see this? This is how I think we should have responded after Paris. I don't know of a man who drives more cultural yuck than Howard Stern, right? I mean, the shock jock. And then Kathy Lee Gifford. Did you hear about the conflict these two have had for years, decades it's gone on? Kathy doesn't even know whatever she did to get on Howard Stern's bad side, but she did. Kathy is a devout follower of Jesus, serious follower of Jesus. Howard Stern is not. And he got mad at Kathy Lee and on his radio show for decades, ripped her apart verbally. And she's got no defense. She doesn't even know what happened. She has no idea why he hates her so much. So year after year this goes on, year after year this goes on. Well, then, a little while ago now, this all happened a little while ago, Kathy Lee at the time was on the Today Show, and they made an announcement that Howard Stern was going to be one of the new judges on a TV show called America's Got Talent. And they were in the same building. So Kathy Lee was having her makeup done. She heard Howard Stern was in the building. She got up and found him, went down and found him. And she walked in, she said, I thought it was about time we say hello. She said, I want to wish you the best with your new show. And she turned around and walked back to her makeup studio and kept getting ready. That's all she said. Kindness in the middle of 30 years of verbal abuse. Later, she was flying to see her son's graduation, and she was getting on the plane. Her phone went off, and she couldn't answer it because of the time, and it was Howard Stern. Howard Stern had called her to say, I can't believe how nice you were to me. I just need to apologize to you. Please call me. So later, the two of them met. Howard Stern immediately starts to apologize. She said, Howard, I'm really happy for you that you're asking for forgiveness. She said, but I want you to know I forgave you 30 years ago. Years later, when Kathy Lee Gifford retired from the Today Show, she got back to her dressing room. There was a huge bouquet of red roses with a message of congratulations signed Howard and Beth Stern. What changed him? Her anger? Her rhetoric? Getting offended at what he did, and it was offensive. See, the day when we stop using the culture's tactics as followers of Jesus is the day we're going to actually see Jesus' transformation happening more. That's when we're going to see it, just like she saw it. And who would have ever thought that you could get Howard Stern to apologize for anything? But it's the Jesus way. Be quiet, move on, forgive them, and look for opportunities to show kindness to them. And they are so stunned when they see that in a world where it's all about vengeance and getting even, that they start to consider maybe there is something to this Jesus thing. Let me ask you to think about a couple of things as we finish. Who's treated you bad recently? Who's offended you? Some of you are like, Brian, your sermon just offended me, so I am offended. Okay? Okay, well, here we go. Let's practice it then. How often do you get offended? It's really important. I put some questions on the back for you to do a self-evaluation to see how easily offended you are, how angry you are. Because the growth trajectory for a Christian is less anger. I didn't say that. Colossians says it. It's something we need to be getting rid of. Do you think of being offended as a choice? I hope you all walk out of here knowing now it's a choice. You can choose to get offended, or you can choose to be quiet and move on. It's always your choice. You don't have to get offended. When you think about somebody who's offended you, think about somebody you're holding a grudge against. What stories have you been telling in your mind about them? Villain stories, they're just evil, awful, horrible people. You've been telling stories that make the anger and pain continue. And are you willing to do what Jesus said, which is, again, forgive them and look for opportunities to be kind? Let me have you bow your heads. You know, all of these are outcomes, and I want you to understand that. When we talk about stuff like this, The very first foundation for all of this is Jesus present in our life in a whole new way. Jesus growing inside of us so that more and more of him is visible and less of me and you. And it all begins with a decision of faith to let Jesus Christ forgive you and to make him the leader of your life. You know, the Bible says that none of us have the ability to earn our way with God Almighty. He's pure and holy, and we're not. And that's why Jesus had to come. And he gave his life for you and for me so that we could be completely forgiven. And we could experience his life inside. For some of you, this may be the next step spiritually, is to let Jesus Christ forgive you and to make him the leader of your life. If this is what you're looking for, then with your head bowed, you can just say something like this to him. Say, Jesus, I'm turning to you today. I need you in my life, and I'm asking you to forgive me. I want to make you the leader of my life today. I want people to really see more of you inside of me. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this service today. We hope as a church and pray that this was something that really helps connect you deeper to Jesus. That's what we're all about as a church. If you need to communicate with us, if you go online to penuelchurchlife.com, in the upper right-hand corner is a box that says, I said yes to Jesus. It also says, please pray for me. Just click on that, and it'll take you to a place where you can communicate with us as a church. So if you ever want any of the resources we mentioned in a service, go there and let us know. We'll gladly send them to you. Or if you made a decision to say yes to Jesus or you have a prayer request, just let us know. And we're always glad to hear from the people who are watching online. And if we can continue to help you grow in your faith in any way, then we want to do that. So again, thank you. And our prayer is that you continue to grow and connect and find the true life that Jesus Christ is offering.